couple of years ago, when I was really trying to dial in this pattern and learn this pattern, I was actually fishing in really stained, really muddy water that was actually only 46 degrees. This is the type of water that a lot of guys are gonna tell you to absolutely run away from. One of the best ways to catch big bass in cold water is with a spinnerbait. For years and years, this spinnerbait has been a deadly technique to catch bass across the nation. But during cold water months, whether that's in the winter and down south for you, or maybe that's early spring for you, the spinnerbait is a lure that can catch some of the biggest bass that swim around in your body of water, whether that's a big lake or a small pond. So let's dive into the ins and outs of the spinnerbait. Speaking of spinnerbaits, you can actually save quite a bit of money right now on your favorite spinnerbaits like War Eagle spinnerbaits and the Booyah Covert series, all at sportsmansoutfitters.com. Right now they're having their cabin fever sale, so if you're like me and you're cooped up at home and you're going through some of your tackle, you can get the best deals to stock up for next year. Also, I don't ask this a ton on the channel, but if you are not subscribed to the Bass Fishing HQ channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and back to cold water spinnerbaits. When I was 15 years old, I bought my first bass boat, and I remember taking out the first time on a big lake. That was in the spring of the year. The water was right around 50 degrees. I was throwing a spinnerbait, and I'll never forget the first bass that I caught in that new boat was a 4-pound, 7-ounce smallmouth that literally made me feel like I was a professional fisherman. But whether you are a tournament angler or not, if you follow some of the tournament coverage like Bassmaster and Major League Fishing, it seems like if guys can get on a good spinnerbait bite these days, they're typically going to do extremely well in tournaments. It seems like when you get on a spinnerbait bite, you're catching some of the best quality fish that swim in your lake, reservoir, or even your pond.
Holy crap.
And the thing about it is cold water is optimal for catching some big fish on the spinnerbait. Now, the guy that I kind of look up to when it comes to spinnerbait fishing, although I don't know him, is Jason Christie. Jason Christie literally just won a tournament last year with a spinnerbait on the Sabine River. And there have been several Bassmaster Classics that he has almost won throwing a spinnerbait. So a spinnerbait just really seems to be kind of his jam. It kind of seems to be what he is really good at. So I love reading articles or watching videos of whatever Jason Christie says about a spinnerbait. So before we kind of talk a little bit more about the spinnerbait itself and some of the equipment and things like that, it's really important to know where you're going to fish a spinnerbait when you get to the water. That water temperature kind of in that 45 to 55 degree range, to me, really seems to be kind of the optimal time to use a spinnerbait. So if you live down south, that may be smack dab in the middle of your winter. For a lot of us that live kind of in the Midwest or northern part of the country, this is gonna be kind of that early springtime for you. Now, when it comes to where I like to throw that spinnerbait, you really kind of have to think about where the bass winter in your particular lake that you fish, where they're going to spawn, and you're gonna try to find that bass highway that is in between those two areas. Probably the biggest highway that bass follow when they're going from wintering areas to their shallow water areas is some sort of creek channel. Finding where bass are located on that creek channel is really the key to throwing this spinnerbait, because when you're throwing it in colder water, you really wanna have some depth close by. I've talked about it a lot on this channel, but bass really like to have a little bit of depth when it comes to fishing for them in cold water. They like to be able to move vertically. They don't always like to move horizontally. So having depth, having that creek channel is really key, and that is exactly where I like to throw a spinnerbait this time of the year. A lot of times it's simply gonna be a creek channel swing bank. This is a bank that is fairly steep. Sometimes it's a 45-degree angle bank, sometimes even steeper than that. And with that spinnerbait, I'm gonna stay off the bank a little bit, make a long 45-degree angle cast it up shallow, and work that bait slowly down there, usually around some rock and wood cover that's on that creek channel swing bank. Now, some creek channels can extend for miles, so you might be asking yourself, well, where exactly do I start? I make this pretty simple. If the water temperature is in the 50-degree range, anything above 50, I'm gonna start closer to the spawning grounds and work towards the main lake. Now, if it's in the 40-degree range, I'm gonna start on the main lake and start working back towards the spawning grounds. And really, it's just about covering a lot of water and trying to find those few little areas that the bass are kind of hanging before they actually go up to spawn. Now, a creek channel swing bank is great, but if you have a secondary point, which is a point inside a major creek arm, and that creek channel runs right up against it, that is an ideal area to throw a spinnerbait. That's an ideal staging area that these bass are going to use before they actually go up and spawn. Every time you're bringing that bait down, don't just keep it a steady retrieve. Every now and then, just simply pop your rod. Now, it is cold water, so you don't want to have an aggressive pop, but when you're bringing it down, just kind of pop your rod, and what that's gonna do is it's gonna make those blades on that spinnerbait just kind of flutter for a split second, and sometimes that can be a trigger mechanism. That can actually make bass strike that actually don't want to hit that lure. Now, another thing that really kind of seems to help this bite, helps you to be able to catch more bass on a spinnerbait in this cold water, is having a little bit of color to your water. You don't want crystal clear water. I'm not saying that you won't be able to get bit on a spinnerbait, but there might be better options in crystal clear water like a jerkbait, or if you're allowed to fish it, an Alabama rig. Those two lures might be better in very clear water. So typically when I'm trying to find this pattern, I'm looking for a little bit of stain, and even if that water is super muddy, I'm talking about you can see 6 inches deep, they will absolutely crush a spinnerbait in cold water. A couple of years ago, when I was really trying to dial in this pattern and learn this pattern, I was actually fishing in really stained, really muddy water that was actually only 46 degrees. This is the type of water that a lot of guys are gonna tell you to absolutely run away from, but a spinnerbait with all the vibration that it puts out is a great bait to use in this cold, muddy water. Now, the key to catching bass in muddy water is having that vibration. And so when I'm fishing in really muddy water, a lot of times when it comes to blades, I like a single Colorado blade. This is a Jason Christie staple. He's the reason why I even fished the single Colorado blade, but now I have a ton of confidence in that single Colorado blade. Now, one of the biggest things about that single Colorado blade is it just seems to catch really big fish. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't catch a ton of small fish on that bait at all. So it really is a big fish technique. Now, sometimes if I'm fishing around areas that have a smaller bass population, for instance, in Ohio, I don't have huge bass populations. I don't have a lot of huge bass in general. So probably my favorite blade combination that I use, it's a little bit more compact of a spinnerbait. It's a double Colorado blade combo. I like a number 4 gold Colorado and a number 3 either orange or red kicker blade on that bait. Now, if I'm fishing in a little bit more clear water, I really like this combo that I'm holding right here. This is a number 3 Colorado blade here, and this is a 4.5 willow leaf blade. This is one of my favorite blade combos to use in that clearer water. Now, most of the time when it comes to color, I'm very simple. It's gonna be either straight white or white and chartreuse. The muddier the water, the more I lean on that chartreuse. But for the most part, that's pretty much it. Those are the colors that I'm gonna stick with. Those are the ones that I've had a ton of success on. Now, I typically don't use a trailer hook all the time with a spinnerbait. A lot of times I like to use a plastic trailer. My favorite plastic trailer is a Zoom Fat Albert. I'm gonna use it in either the white color or the chartreuse pepper color. Now, when it comes to equipment, rod, reel, and line, I'm gonna go with a 6.3-to-1 gear ratio reel. I like a little bit slower reel to allow me to really slow roll that bait. When it comes to a rod, something in that 7 foot to 7'3" in length. Usually I'm looking for a medium heavy power and a little bit more of that moderate to moderate fast action. I don't want a real stiff rod, but I also don't want too limber of a rod. And most of the time I'm going to be fishing 20-pound fluorocarbon because you're gonna be fishing this around a lot of rock and wood cover. And 20-pound fluorocarbon, you hook that 5 or 6 pounder, you're gonna be able to get that fish away from that cover cover before he gets all up in it. Now, if you guys wanna know why I don't use a trailer hook, you can actually click on this video right here. And if you wanna learn more about blades and blade configurations, you can click on this video right here. Also, don't forget to save a little bit of money at sportsmansoutfitters.com right now. Hit that subscribe button, comment below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.